In this episode, we take a look at Albert Einstein's The Negro Question essay and discuss how he saw race affecting American society. And later on, we discuss a piece from the Christian Century magazine about both longstanding and recent connections between Judaism and Africa, and how that may refute many people's modern conceptions of the Jewish religion. Hello, welcome to the Call Like I See It podcast. I'm James Keys, and joining me today is a man whose takes are as foundational as the Genesis. Tunde Ogunlana. Tunde, are you ready to show us why it ain't hard to tell that the world is yours?
Yeah, man, but damn, that's a pretty big, I got some big shoes to fill. You're talking about, like Genesis. I'm not sure I'm that grand. Not sure I'm that grandiose. Come on, man. And I want to apologize also for our watching audience on YouTube that I'm wearing a hat because I'm in my late 40s and I'm middle-aged, so I shouldn't be wearing a hat on a show with a collared shirt. But I'm having a bad hair day, which means I didn't have time to shave my head so you can see my sunroof. So no one else is going to see it. So
I guess the audio audience can just picture it, huh?
It'll be a bad visual, but yes.
Now, before we get started, if you enjoy the show, I ask that you subscribe and like the show on YouTube or your podcast app. Doing so really helps the show out. We're recording this on March 31st, 2026. And Tunde, we recently came across Albert Einstein's 1946 essay, The Negro Question, which provides an interesting look at how he viewed the way Americans handled race in comparison to its stated equality and democratic ideals, particularly from the perspective of someone who came to the country as an adult and had only been in the country for 10 years, around 10 years at the time. So Tunde, what did you think of the Negro Question and him analogizing white Americans' mistreatment of blacks to a tradition and the feeling of superiority that comes along with that as a fatal misconception?
It's very interesting. I did find his allusion to the American culture around this race stuff to a tradition.
Yeah.
I found that interesting. I never thought of it, but it actually makes a lot of sense. And it helps me actually, as a human being that's lived through this, again, American, and would be considered a member of the quote unquote Negro race. It helps me actually appreciate that he's onto something, that this is more of a tradition than anything else. And I think when you look at that, it helps me unpack it in a different way. So I can appreciate his sentiment there.
That's why I put it into the intro, though, is because it's like, oh, that's a very interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, exactly, like profound. And so, but then the funny thing is, I was going to laugh and say, man, in the climate we have today, man, we got to hide this essay because they're going to say that Einstein's too woke and he wanted DEI, so they're going to remove him from like the National Academy of Sciences, and they're going to take his name off anything with the government exposure.
Well, the state of Florida, now you can't learn about him anymore. With this.
Yeah. So they might ban teaching about Albert Einstein in public school here in Florida if we let this essay get out. If we let the wrong people, or I should say, the leadership in our state find out about it. I don't even say the wrong people, the people that are in charge. So that's. Listen, I say that as a joke, right? But I say it as a joke with some meaning in a serious way, which is he wrote this in 1946, here literally 80 years ago. And here we are, and I'm joking about we have a government that would be hostile to this Albert Einstein's essay about race in America. So this is something that is a tradition in America. And that's why I appreciate the way he said it. This is part of our culture. And I guess maybe the exhausting part, if I can use that term, is that.
Well, if you're on the business end of it, for sure.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. It's not going to go away because people like you and I aren't going to stop telling the truth about American history. And the truth of American history is very beautiful if you include everyone. And it's beautiful regardless, but I'm just saying that it doesn't make it any worse by including the stories of how a lot of people and a lot of groups contributed to the beauty of this country. And so that's where I appreciate his essay. I also think it doesn't surprise me that in 1946, a German Jew who'd been living in America for a decade might have an opinion about how he's seeing a group of people in the country he's living in being treated right after the Holocaust and the Second World War, when he saw how the members of his community, the Jewish community, were being treated in Europe. And why he left Germany because of the treatment of Jews. So I'm not surprised that someone like Albert Einstein would speak up and speak so eloquently in 1946 on this topic.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, and he says in the essay, part of him doing this is because he's bothered by this and he doesn't want to stand by and do nothing, and so that's interesting to me. The perspective that he brings as an outsider is it leads to interesting insights and interesting choice of words, like the tradition piece. Like if you look at this as a tradition of oppression, of feeling of superiority, then it makes a lot of sense why people would have such an emotional connection to it as well. Like, oh, this is what I learned to feel good about. This is what makes me feel at home. This is what makes me feel comfortable. Those are the kind of things traditions do. And so it's like, okay, yeah, if it's a tradition to try to step on a segment of the society, then like people would defend that in ways that may seem, it may seem very irrational, because by definition, a lot of times traditional would be irrational. Tradition holds on to things that is irrational. But the perspective as an outsider, I think, is one that we should value, because he doesn't, and he knows this. He doesn't come in with all the baggage. But I note that at the beginning of the essay, and we'll have this in the show notes, but at the beginning of the essay, he kind of starts out the essay almost defending his right to have an opinion. Now this is someone who you can comfortably say was the smartest person, at least, that was doing stuff in the 20th century. And so he starts out like he's going to wade in, this guy, he's coming up with theory of relativity and all this other stuff. This guy, when he's about to wade into the racial discussion in America, he spends the first couple of paragraphs saying, hey, here's why I should be able to have a say here. So he knows, like, oh yeah, people are going to people are going to be really taken aback by this. The people who this is their tradition, so starting off saying, hey, even though I'm someone who didn't grow up in this, that actually makes me well suited to be able to see it and see a different perspective, and different perspectives can be helpful and all that. So to me, the hearing about it was interesting. But then actually reading it and really breaking down a couple pieces of it was like, oh, wow, this is it's really, 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 kind of poignant in the sense of, and then to your point, how looking at this today, and things are different than they were in 1946 today, but and how it still would have, there's still a segment of people that would have a very negative reaction to it. And there's plenty of people that'd be like, yeah, we've made progress along these lines and we feel good about that. So it is the eternal question of the American experience because of that. And, he comes in and, feels like he needs to weigh on it. And, that kind of makes sense. Like he was a smart guy.
Yeah. Well, I think, this is one thing that I think is hard for us as Americans to appreciate, that someone can come in from the outside, from a foreigner, basically can immigrate here, look at us without the emotional baggage and make certain judgments that could be accurate, right?
That's not because hard for us to understand. People just have too much hubris. We feel like we can do that to all the conflicts else around the world, all the other conflicts.
No, I don't disagree,
We definitely
James.
look at the Shia and Sunni and be like, we can tell you guys what to do.
Yeah. Well, I guess we're doing that with Iran right now.
We're doing that. We do that everywhere.
But the thing is that I think the word you use correctly is hubris. Which is why we can't seem to see it, right? We're in our own way that way. But I'll say this, because into the essay, he begins to give an example, and he says, when he talks to certain Americans at the time about this, and he says that they explain their attitudes towards the Negroes, and I'll read the last sentence. It says, quote, "They are not equals in intelligence, sense of responsibility, or reliability." That's what he said people would tell him when he asked them about, why do you guys treat the Negroes this way? And he says, so I'm going to quote Albert Einstein, quote, "I am firmly convinced that whoever believes this suffers from a fatal misconception. Your ancestors dragged these black people from their homes by force, and in the white man's quest for wealth and an easy life, they have been ruthlessly suppressed and exploited, degraded into slavery. The modern prejudice against Negroes is the result of the desire to maintain this unworthy condition." I thought that was pretty profound because what he's speaking to is a couple things. The quest for wealth. So what he's getting in is the whole colonial thing, right? That the Europeans going around the world and basically colonizing all these other people and exploiting them for wealth. And then at the end, he says, the modern prejudice, meaning in the 40s now, against Negroes is the result of the desire to maintain this unworthy condition. So I wouldn't say that obviously in the 46 we didn't have slavery, but it was the unworthy condition of that hierarchy and the word we used from the beginning that he pointed out, tradition. And I think that's what makes this very difficult, because as I thought about the word tradition, James, I thought about the response I've seen some people in our culture have to things like the Confederate flag during my life, where they'll say it's about heritage, not hate. And now you and I could intellectually sit there, well, maybe it's about the heritage of hate, about states' rights, about owning people and all that. But the way that Albert Einstein used tradition, like for the first time, I appreciated that the word heritage to some people means tradition. And this is how the topic that to you and I is important, like this and all that, can get muddied for certain Americans, where when you talk about, hey, you know, maybe we shouldn't revere the Confederacy because they were traitors and attacked the United States. What we're doing is these people have been convinced that that's their tradition, whether it is or not. And so that's why I think some of these arguments are difficult in our society.
The tradition of bigotry, so to speak, tradition of the hierarchy. Like the hierarchy. I thought that
I'm not opposed to you going there.
I focused on that paragraph as well. But I actually called it in the beginning when I talked about the quote unquote fatal misconception. Like he thought this was serious. One, he as an outsider who had been here, not too long, felt the need to write about it. Like this is a physicist, a theoretical physicist, and he's looking around like, somebody needs to say something more. People are saying about it. I need to say something about this. And then he's talking about this isn't a guy who's flippant with his words. He calls it a fatal misconception. And you tie that together, that first sentence, that bigotry mindset being a fatal misconception, with that last sentence that you cited, which to me, that really connected to the psychic wage, like the idea that it's the modern prejudice against the Negroes as a result of the desire to maintain this unworthy condition. And, the unworthy condition is about the quest for wealth. So you got to, exploit, degrade, and do slavery and so forth. That is basically the connection of, okay, the rich people can get wealthy off of this exploitation, turning the poor whites against the poor blacks, so that the poor whites never look up and say, hey, we can get a fair shake in society. We can live longer. We can get, have a better life if we just get with the other working class people, which are the black people. It really connects a lot of things. If you look at American history and what other observers have talked about, like, hey, this is the biggest double cross, because the people that are egging you on to this, if you're the working class whites, the people that are egging you on are the people that are the ones keeping you poor by egging you on against the other poor people. So he touches on a lot of things in here, man. And it's stuff, again, he's not the first person to bring that up. And he didn't use the term psychic wage, but connecting, as you pointed out, connecting the financial piece of this and how that plays in. And then again, that's a pretty, that calling it a fatal misconception is that's not saying, oh yeah, you guys could, you may be able to do better if you do something, if you let go of that. That's like, this is a pretty serious thing he's looking at.
Yeah, no, man. And I wanted to ask you your thoughts because, specifically on a couple things. One is, Albert Einstein, obviously being alive at the time he was, and like I said earlier about, 1946, you had just finished the World War II, you had just had the Holocaust, you had him having experienced true discrimination, as someone like that. Do you think that gave him a different lens of which to see the American culture in this light, or do you think that he would have seen it anyway? I just want to get your thoughts on that, and then how do you think that plays out today, basically with today's youth and all that?
Well, I don't think that he saw it differently because of his experience. What I do think is that he felt compelled to speak about it because of his experience. Because there's many people who've come to America and saw this and be like, yo, this is crazy. You know what I'm saying? And so, but maybe that person would, or, a person coming from a privileged environment, or coming from a place where they couldn't relate or couldn't see how crazy it could get, would just say that at dinner parties, like, oh, I just can't believe that they really did it. But this guy's like, hey, at the risk of angering a lot of people, and these are people that do extreme things, I'm going to put this out there because I don't feel comfortable in myself not putting it out there. So I think the impetus to share is probably what you can really tie to his life experience. Like, I cannot just be quiet about this. This is what I see. And so to me, like, when I'm looking at that, the experiences where we see how a society itself can be turned against the minority, oftentimes to the benefit of some other group, a lot of whether it be the resourced people or whatever. It's a story that is in human cultures all over. It's something that's been effective ever since you get these hierarchical societies. Like when we read the book Sapiens, guy talked about like, hey, this has been going back since agriculture. Once you had agriculture, which meant everybody didn't have to make their own food and do their own food. You had specialization. Then you had people who then would try to take a hierarchy, try to grab the top of it, and then explain to everybody else why they should be at the bottom and they should be at the top. And dividing people based on things that you can see or things that are out there, whether it be religion, race, has been one of the oldest and most reliable tricks. So, again, the insight itself, or the observation itself isn't really the crazy part. It's how he chooses to describe it and that he felt compelled to share it, which really stands out.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, man. And I'll just wrap up with this. In reading this and thinking about 1946, and I think you said it well. I mean, we got to acknowledge that there's a lot of progress in America on this topic since 1946. So I'm not here to say that the world looks like it did back then for Black Americans. But what kind of saddened me when you talk about this word tradition, and I think that's why it stood out to me. What do we do a lot of times culturally? All of us, we pass our traditions down to our kids. Right.
Yeah. Well, that's a big part of this. Yeah.
Yeah. And that could be the Christmas tree. Yeah. And that could be the menorah, whatever it is. And he discusses that about the influence. It says, quote, opinions and emotions, which we unconsciously absorb as children from our environment. And that got me thinking also, James, about what we've seen recently in the last year or so with young people from one of the two major parties. There've been some leaked text chats. And last year, there was one, the Young Republicans group, which I think is people aged between 20 and 40, that's, where they were making very anti-Semitic comments in there. They were calling Black people N-words and watermelon people and all that kind of dumb stuff that you get. And then more recently, in the last month, this affected me a little bit more. Not affected me, but I paid attention a bit more because it happened here in Florida with two universities, one of them, which happens to be my alma mater, which is Florida International University in Miami, and the second was University of Florida in Gainesville. Both schools have had group text leaked from the young college Republicans that are really bad in terms of their racial hatred. And the young college Republicans in the University of Florida have sued the university because they want to do Sieg Heils in public and they want it to be part of freedom of speech. So my point is that that's the sad part to me, that I realized as I'm reading this, that those traditions are continued to be passed down to the next generation, so that me and you, our kids, are going to have to deal with those kids. And so that, to me, I just want to say that.
And the point being is that they didn't grow up in a society where that stuff was outwardly acceptable in public. And so they're pulling that in. They're receiving that and the desire to do that from some other means. And that's your point about it being a tradition. This is something they pick up in the home or in their intimate social circles, that, hey, this is something, I want to make this like this again. I want to make this country like that again, like where my traditions, the things that I think about, that my parents talked about or whatever, are things we can do in public again. So, it connects to that, from a traditional standpoint. Yeah. And like you said, that ties the emotional piece, and also why it doesn't just go away. Once it goes out of sight, it doesn't just go away.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So I think we can wrap this here. We'll have a second part of this, second part of a discussion today. So please join us for that. And subscribe to the podcast, rate it, review it, tell us what you think, send it to a friend. Until next time, I'm James Keys.
I'm Tunde Ogunlana.
All right, we'll talk soon.